So guys, I want to talk about this video that I saw based on black fatigue, and part of my YouTube channel is to talk about controversial subject matters. Pardon me, I just got a hiccup, but I do talk about controversial subject matters, and as somebody who's part African American and definitely has dealt with black racism, been called, a nigger a lot of times in my life, and grown up, in many inner city communities and many white communities, that definitely black fatigue hits home really, because I used to get bullied by a lot of people who were like part of that thug ghetto behavior when I was a kid. And then also too, when I moved to white communities, I met a lot of people who assumed that I was some ghetto ass nigga from the hood and other things like that. I remember like one time in college, there was a kid saying, what kind of fucking nigger works that hard, because I had like 5 jobs and other things like that. So definitely black fatigue is important, because unfortunately, one thing that happens is that whenever people act ghetto and stereotypical, usually when it comes to African Americans or people who are part African American, it's like the actions of one black person represents the whole race. That's usually how it goes, when that shouldn't be like that. There's a lot of white people who've been school shooters, but we don't look at white people as school shooters. If black people were doing that, they would look at school shooters because of American racism. With that being said, I saw this video a while back. I've been very busy with my job, but I saw this video a while back of like these kids in diapers who were cursing out police officers, and they're saying like, they call them a bitch, and I think I heard an adult background saying like, fry head Oreo or something like that. But, that is also kind of very, unfortunate that it happens a lot in many different communities where children are disrespectful to police officers, or sometimes they're that young and they hear, rap music, or they have social media, or they have parents that are argumentative with police officers. And I think that, one bad thing is that there has to be a sense of shame, because, if you have like kids that are cursing all the time, you really have to blame the parents. You have to look at the environment and being like, hey, why is this happening? Like, I remember when I was in high school, I had a younger brother, and he would say the word fuck a bunch of times, because my dad would always be like, Jesus fucking Christ or whatever. I remember like one time, my dad was cleaning my room, and I had a bunch of rocks that were they're on the windowsill, and like my dad accidentally knocked them over a couple times. So I was saying the F word, and then my little brother was saying the F word a bunch of times, really. And my dad just told us to go play outside instead of just, pulling him over his knee and spanking him a bunch of times because he knew better. But that's also kind of like something that happens where, like, a lot of adults tend to use profanity and not really care. And then the children do that. And then sometimes there's one or two things happen. Like, sometimes the adults don't care. Sometimes there are certain situations, like, if somebody's having a bad day and then police officers are harassing them, they're like, if my cop says, fuck you, police officer, or I'm going to kill you, police officer, or you're a fucking bitch, police officer, or fuck the police officer, and other things like that, they're not going to care, because they kind of are like, okay, you know what, the kid is feeling how I feel, So sometimes there's diversion of discipline, but then there's also another issue as well, really, where sometimes parents would smack or punch or hit their kid, in that one instance, it'd be like, hey, shut the fuck up, really. I'm the adult, I can use whatever language I want. But that's never appropriate, because that you're teaching, double standards. Like, we all got to set better example to our children. But I also think that when it comes to black people, yes, it's a harder situation with police, because obviously there's been a long history of police harassment. There's been a long history of police brutality. There's been a long history of double standards with police officers, like they're showing a video of Dylan Ruth, the guy in Georgia. About 10 years ago, he shot up a church with a bunch of black people, and when they showed his arrest video, the cops went in. They were kind of all like cool, telling jokes to each other, chuckling. They took him to Burger King, like they acted like this was cool. But if it was a black guy shooting up a church with just white people, and they're mostly white women, we understand that, you know what, more than likely you're gonna get a battering ram through the door, guns aimed at him, and if there's other people saying what's going on, they'll probably be detained or thrown against the wall, really, and saying, oh well, you're protecting your homie, you're protecting your nigga or whatever, you know, type of thing, really. So I understand why there is hostility towards that, and then there's a lot of defensiveness, and then also too, from a personal story, I was almost murdered by the police. Like I worked at a store that was robbed by some security guards, and I remember cops aiming guns at me. So I understand why, you know, with some black people, you know, there's a lot of hostility with police officers because there's been a systematic pattern of one side respect of, you know, they're allowed to cross lines, they're allowed to disrespect us, they're allowed to shoot us, they're allowed to be, you know, racist. Because I remember like when my store was robbed by its own security guards, the police chief was saying things like, you know, what was Calvin doing who robbed the store? Was he smoking a blunt? Was he chilling with his niggas and homies? And automatically, if I did a police report and a police complaint, you know, that would be dealt with, really. But that's kind of why you almost see a pattern of many parents, you know, just teaching their kids not to be respectful to police officers. And there's also social media. So sometimes you may have kids that look at, like, watch Boys in the Hood or a lot of other adult films, or know about the LA riots, or know about, I believe it like it happened in Philadelphia, where there was like this there was like this black group of people who had beliefs, and what happened was they were hiding in a home, they wouldn't come out, and then they dropped a bomb on them, like legitimately from a plane, and other things like that. So there's a lot of like times where kids are brought up watching violent media, but also they understand, you know, black and white relationships, because obviously their parents don't want them to go through stuff. But I think that one thing that needs to be emphasized too is that, you know, you got to teach your kids how to respond to police officers and how to respond appropriately. If you have kids who are in diapers and they're kind of using a bunch of profanity, they're smacking at police officers and other things like that, that's a problem, because you're teaching them to be rude and belligerent. And then also too, it says something about your parenting skills when you have children who behave that way. And it's not necessarily to be anti-police. You can be like, hey, you know what, we don't like police officers in this house. We want to teach you to be careful, please, because things happen. But we got to teach you how to respond appropriately and when to stand up for yourself appropriately. And that's important, really. But also too, it says something when you have kids and your children are cursing and swearing and being disrespectful to police officers. And then again, when you have videos like this, it creates a stereotype that African Americans are not responsible parents. They have kids who curse a lot. They have kids who have very like nappy hair, almost like they never heard of a broom. And then they also have kids who just try to be mean and ghetto. So like this is a very unfortunate video because it highlights those black stereotypes, you know. So I think it's really just, you know, understanding, telling kids, okay, you know, there is racism in this world. You know, police treat people differently based on the color of their skin, based on their social economics, and but we have to know how to respond appropriately and stand up for ourselves appropriately. Like I remember, like when like my parents are I'm adopted, my parents are white, but I remember, like, you know, when the police were aiming guns at me and they're snickering and grinning when the store got robbed at Conway. And then I also remember when I was talking to the police chief, he was shaking his head, rolling his eyes, saying the N-word, accusing Calvin, who robbed the store, of smoking drugs. You know, what would happen if I had a father that's like, okay, all that happened, and you're going to do a complaint, and all that happened, and you're going to do YouTube videos and talk about that, and we're going to file a complaint against the Hampton Police Department. Like, you know, wouldn't that be more appropriate? Because, you know, I hate saying this, but there are some parents, and sometimes if it's a white parent adopting a mixed race or black child, they may be like, okay, we're going to underreact. You know, whenever bad things happen to you or racism or whatever, we're going to underreact. And then sometimes you may have black parents that teach underreaction and overreaction. Definitely in this video, this is a clear sense of an overreaction, you know. Teach your kids right. You know, they're cursing and they're using profanity and they're like, fuck the police and whatever. You know what? That's just not a good way to raise a child, really. And as I said, that sometimes when you watch videos like this is free advertisement to say, hey, whenever it comes to adoption of black children, don't send them back to the crazy black mamas and the thug daddies, or the daddies that are not there. Give them to the white people because they know how to domesticate a black child, really. Because I remember, like, people would joke about that when I was a kid. They would say, oh, well, it's good that you're not by whites. They domesticated you. They removed that African ghetto behavior, because some people think like that. So obviously when you have videos like this, it stereotypes, reinforcing stereotypes.